So lately, we have been seeing and hearing a lot of people ask questions around the ERTC tax credit. So we are so lucky to have someone join us today that has the expertise. So she's going to share some of our knowledge and hopefully answer some of those questions that people are asking and that you're probably wondering about too. So Rebekah, I will let you introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, Brooke. So I'm Rebekah Nuss. I'm with Synergi Partners. We are a boutique tax credit firm. We've been in business for about 40 years, and we focus entirely on hiring and retention credits for that entire time. And right now, we're the largest provider of the employee retention credit in the U.S., privately held, and by far the largest provider to the staffing industry. So I'm excited to chat with you today about the staffing industry and this credit.
Amazing. So first of all, let's just say, what is the ERTC tax credit that we keep hearing about?
Yeah, so the employee retention tax credit was created last year by the CARES Act legislation. It was part of the response by Congress to the stimulus needed for the pandemic. So this is a payroll tax credit that's available to businesses who've been impacted by COVID. So that impact can either be represented as a financial decline or it can be operational changes they've experienced. But once that they're identified as an eligible employer, then the credit is calculated as a percentage of wages paid to employees, and then you claim it by amending your payroll tax returns.
Great. So are staffing companies eligible?
Absolutely, yeah. There's no specific industry that is or isn't eligible for this credit. So all companies in the US could potentially be eligible as long as they meet one of those two requirements. Now, most of the staffing companies I work with rely on that operational impact test more than the gross receipts test. Gross receipts right now for staffing companies are super inflated because of the inflated base rates. So sometimes that top line revenue can seem a bit more optimistic than the actual impact a company has felt. We use that government orders test to identify ways that staffing companies have been impacted by COVID in non-revenue impacts. So things like changes to the way they do business, things that they can no longer do that they used to be able to do, and other types of impacts like that.
Great. So what if their profits are up?
Yeah, so it's a common question. Profitability doesn't mean you necessarily don't qualify for this credit. It's a really common misconception that your revenues have to be down by 50% or have to be down by 20% in order to qualify. That's just one of two ways that you can qualify. The government orders test is based, like I said before, on more operational changes. So for staffing companies, that can be represented in a lot of different ways, depending on their industry. It could be light industrial staffing companies who had closures of their branch locations and could no longer accept walk-in traffic. It could be, other companies, maybe professional white collar IT companies that traditionally would do all of their interviews in person and do, very personalized walk on to the new hiring manager, that they can no longer do that. It could be staffing companies that did a ton of networking, in-person interviews, in-person drop-offs, client meetings. Maybe they're doing donut drop-offs, participating in, networking events, trade shows, association meetings, and those types of activities have been canceled. And so that's hurt their business development efforts. So there's a whole variety of ways that staffing companies might have been impacted by COVID-related restrictions that are agnostic to their revenue. So just because you didn't have a decline in your revenue doesn't mean you shouldn't consider, pursuing this credit, because there's other ways that you could potentially qualify.
Perfect. That's really helpful because I know people are, especially in certain sectors, are going to be wondering that if they're still eligible, if their profits are up. Yeah. It sounds like you have, but do you work with any staffing companies now?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a company, Synergi Partners, we work with all different industries. We've worked with over 8,000 companies to claim $5 billion of this credit. I personally lead our staffing practice. So I work with all of our staffing companies, and we're working with over 900 staffing companies for the calculation of this credit. And they're represented by probably every flavor of staffing you can imagine, all industries, all jurisdictions. My largest staffing company puts about 45,000 people to work a week, and my smallest probably puts 20 people to work a week, and everything in between. So tons of experience in kind of every version of staffing out there.
So you're the it girl for this, it sounds like.
That's right.
So what are some of the ways you might recommend spending the money?
That's a great question. So this program is great because there's no restrictions on the way that you allocate these funds. So PPP loans, you had to spend it on payroll or certain qualified expenses. but this is actually a refund of overpayment of your own payroll taxes. So there's no rules in how you spend it. We've seen so many businesses be able to use these funds to keep people employed, to keep their business operating. In some cases, the credits can be very generous. So I've even seen some companies be able to give back to their employees and do some really neat things in recognition of the hardships that they faced because of the pandemic. But truly, it's at the business owner's discretion. But if you buy a yacht or something, I always request a ride.
And this is where I'm supposed to tell you to buy some tech.
That's right.
Utilize it now, right?
That's right.
So, okay, great. That was honestly so helpful. And I know you are just full of knowledge, ready to share it with everybody. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. For those of you who want to get in touch with Rebekah and talk to her further, please, you can reach out to me. Rebekah has passed along the best way to get in contact with her, so I can share you those details. But thanks again, Rebekah.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. Thanks for having me.